Richard Crouse.
You're exhausted, I understand. I know your schedule's been a little outrageous. You're going to spend 48 hours in the air to spend probably 24 hours on the ground here talking about the movie. But I guess that means you really believe in the movie.
Well, I think it's ridiculous to pour your heart, your heart and soul into something and, work on it so hard with so many people so passionate about it for a long period and then not try and get people to go see it.
Yeah.
That's the point of making films after all. It's not some big didactic effort on our part to teach lessons about celebrity and about youth and about the power of corruption or anything like that. It's because so people will enjoy watching it.
It's interesting because this story, Dorian Gray, is 100 years old, and yet a lot of the elements that are in the movie and in the story are very timely even for today. I mean, I think the idea of the youth culture and how today particularly we celebrate in a way that I don't think predates the last 20 years. We celebrate in a big way youth and beauty and that, and I think that relates to the book and to the film.
Yeah, it does seem particularly timely. We do live in a culture which is obsessed with the appearance of staying young, and the aesthetic and beauty and places value on these things probably a lot higher than it should be.
Right.
And so it seems like we haven't really learnt very much, even though this book was a warning 100 years ago. But it wasn't. I think if you know a bit about Oscar Wilde, in that he placed a lot of value on looks himself,
Yeah.
and yet he seemingly wrote this book about a man who exchanges, his youth for his soul, and it is ultimately his downfall. He's equally he's kind of equally ambiguous about the theme of living for today and not being concerned about tomorrow, that sort of carpe diem attitude, which is something that I think was sort of an attitude invented really by the Victorians, I think. Right. And he's sort of equally ambiguous about that. He sort of raises it thematically, but then doesn't sort of answer who is right. I mean, you don't know who the villain of the piece is, whether it's Henry Wotton or whether it's Dorian. I think it probably seems to. I think in the book probably it feels like it's Dorian is the villain, but maybe in the film it feels probably more like it's Henry Wotton is this great deceiver and manipulator.
I thought so too, because he's the person that pushes Dorian sort of down the path. But in some ways, I mean, he has no idea of how far Dorian can take this.
Absolutely,
and
but
so
he keeps
is he a
prodding and keeps pushing.
Yeah, I mean, is he a villain, or is he just a guy that likes to go out and drink and hang out with whores? I mean, I'm not sure.
I think it starts off mischievous, but he keeps prodding and keeps pushing, and he sees the effect that it's having. He sees that he's very early on when Dorian breaks up with Sybil Vane, he sees that how much power he has over Dorian.
Right.
And that power shift never really changes. Even at the end, Dorian turns on Henry and says, "You made me into this monster, because you assured me that this was the path, but you didn't believe it yourself. It was just nonsense. It was just froth and nonsense." And Dorian begins to spout the same words, but they don't come out of his mouth in the same way, because he's actually experienced these things, and eventually I think he probably works out that a lot of it was not true. And when you've devoted your life to a set of epigrams and witticisms, you feel ridiculous
And cheated, maybe.
and cheated. Absolutely. He doesn't, and I think there's a little more sort of redemption, salvation, whatever you want to call it, for Dorian in the film than there is probably in the book. In terms of the structure and the Emily Wotton character and all of that. But I think that's important for a modern audience to try and empathise with any sort of hero, anti-hero, because that's what we're used to seeing on film.
Well, it raises an interesting idea of the idea that the book is a classic, but can the film be a different thing than the book? I mean, obviously.
Yes. Well, the book was so shocking when it came out. It was used as evidence against Oscar Wilde in his trial of the corruption of his soul. Ironically, it's very difficult particularly with a film that you want to maintain a certain certificate for to shock. You almost can't do it. We've had to cut so much from this to prevent it from being an 18 certificate in terms of the sex and violence and the lengths to which Dorian will go to, which we thought it was important to film, and unfortunately we've had to cut some of that out.
Maybe they'll reappear on the DVD.
Well, hopefully so, because I think it adds some power to where Dorian is willing to go and where he takes it.
Richard Crouse.